This episode is brought to you by Rad Dudes Who Love Nature.
Well, that's why fish conservation is hard, right? You want to share or save the charismatic, petable, cute things, and then it's like, there's some fish over here too. I promise they're here.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. We've got both of our co-hosts today, Billy Brown and
Tony Crosdale.
And then we've got a special guest today, Shannon White. And in a little bit, she's going to tell us all about herself and what stuff she researches. And we're going to talk about sturgeon. And you might be thinking, gosh, that doesn't sound like an urban wildlife topic, but we're going to connect it, dang it, once we get to that point. As always, please like us and comment on your podcast listening app of choice. Please tell all your friends about the podcast and how awesome it is. And we do have Patreon. So as you all can imagine, Tony and I, we have never had any expectations of getting rich off this podcast or even breaking even on it. But if you contribute to the Patreon, it'll help us pay for things like web hosting costs. Someday Tony will make up the money he spent on all the equipment. And we really appreciate it. You'll find it under the Wildlife Observer Network Patreon. So we appreciate it if you contribute there. With that, I'm going to, even before we get to our guest, I'm going to say something really quick. We used to do this more to shout out other podcasts. I have been addicted lately to a Fish and Wildlife Service podcast called The Fish of the Week. And it is exactly what it sounds like. You have a couple fish biologists who every week talk about a different fish, and they have an expert guest on. And there's like fish because there's tons of kinds of fish I never heard of before. Last time I listened, it was about Colorado pike minnows. And I had no idea that you could combine pike and minnow and it would still be a real.
I know about pike minnows. I will say that I'm not. It's not my ears are not virgin to hear. I know about pike minnows. They're cool looking.
Well, mine were, but yeah, they are cool. They're like the body of a pike with like a carp face attached to it, with a bigger mouth. They were referring to them as having Mick Jagger lips, but they're basically the largest of the carp and minnow family that we have in I think this hemisphere. Certainly North America, maybe just North America, but they're big. They can historically could have gotten up to 6 feet long. And are pretty awesome fish. Now the Colorado pike minnow are very endangered, like everything else that's native to the Colorado River system. But there's other ones in other parts of the West. So with all of that, Shannon, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do for a living?
Just real quick, I was saying I do love fish enough to own a field guide to flying fish. So just saying.
Perfect. You're ready for this night. So I am a research biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey Eastern Ecological Science Center in Kearneysville, West Virginia. We work on a lot of different species, a lot of different fish. Generally speaking, obviously the ones that are of some sort of conservation concern are kind of the top of our radar. They give us the most research monies. There's the ones that need our most help as well. But there's a lot of other different species we work on, some plants, some mammals. We're kind of spread across a lot of different taxa there. But generally speaking, my specialty is fish. I'm kind of a trained trout ecologist, but in the last few years, I've jumped ship into some more anadromous species with lately kind of a specialty in sturgeon, specifically Atlantic sturgeon.
You just mentioned that you're a trout biologist, or that's how it's where your roots are.
Yep.
And this is an interesting question that came up in an alert from an environmental organization that I won't name. 99.9% of the time, I love everything they do, but they sent out a notice about a recent fish kill in a stream, and they referred to a ton of what they in the press release called native brown trout getting killed. And so I know the director, and I sent them an email, and I was like, hey, brown trout aren't native. And I said, did you mean to write brook trout? And I think Tony even has a T-shirt that I love that's got a brook trout on it that says like native species on it, if I recall correctly, right, Tony?
Yeah, it has a brook trout. Where has that shirt gone? You just reminded me of that one. That shirt I got to find it. That won't fit me anymore.
Shirt.
But yeah, it has a brook trout with the outline of Pennsylvania, and it says native underneath it.
Yeah,
I think we have the same shirt. Yeah, that's what I have.
And so, in any case, the point that they were making when I wrote back to me was like, yeah, they're not native, but they're naturalized. They're sort of part of our suite of species that you find in streams around Pennsylvania. And I wasn't going to like get an argument about it. I was like, okay, sure. But I still was sort of scratching my head about it. And
I mean, naturalized and native are not the same thing.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting conversation, I feel like, because there's like the people that are purists and it's native only, right? And then there's folks that are in the camp of, if it's there, it's belongs there more or less. It's life basically. So let's save all species kind of more or less regardless, especially for something that's been there a while and established and is naturalized or wild. I think is the wild brown trout is the way I've kind of always heard it.
Wild would be a good way to put it. Yeah.
That's definitely the way I've heard it more frequently is just being called wild brown trout. I think it's definitely an argument that most states are having right now in trout world, where basically throughout the entire range of brook trout, there's some competing non-native trout species. And so kind of what do you do with a non-native trout? Do you manage for it? Do you save it? Because anglers really love it. Or, do you try to get them out because they might be hurting brook trout? And I think that there's, depending on the stream, is kind of deciding it for you to some extent.
Yeah. I find, I'm going to get back to sturgeon in a sec, but I was, as I've done research into what historically has been introduced around the Philly area, for a writing project, I was sort of going through lots of stuff, plants, animals. And I just hadn't really thought about it, but I was amazed by how many of the fish that we think of as just natural in the Delaware River drainage, which is our home drainage. And I'm like, smallmouth bass? Nope. Introduced channel catfish? Nope. Introduced, sort of like going down a list and it's amazing.
I mean, it's not coincidental that it's a lot of the prized angling species or the recreational species, right? Like a lot of the recreational species are kind of the problem childs, right?
It's something that a friend of ours who's a nature writer in the Philly area, Ken Frank, he basically just spends a lot of time looking at using Google Books, because they have all these scanned and publicly accessible for free books that were published long enough ago that their copyrights expired. And so I was finding like writings about sort of what fish there are to catch in the Delaware, and a guy saying like, it's like basically saying, and they're going to introduce channel catfish soon. It's going to be great. Sort of anglers who are like itching to get, the really cool fish to catch into the Delaware drainage, and sort of brought that practice to life. And so but in any case, the reason we're talking so much about fish and about sturgeon in particular is sturgeon have been like a pet topic of mine in writing for Grid Magazine. It's one of these things that there's some word for this when you're shifting expectations of what should be living around you. You sort of like your benchmark drops because you were born after something already got scarce.
Shifting
baseline. Thank you. And so one of the species that we've had our baseline shift about has been the Atlantic sturgeon in the Delaware drainage. I'm guessing drainage is all up and down the east coast of North America. They're huge fish. There used to be actually, I'm going to let you say the numbers, but just an astonishing drop in what there used to be. Used to be a ton of sturgeon. The reason why the initial population crash might have happened wasn't necessarily related to the city, but now the things that keep them from coming back, many of them are actually what I think of as urban problems, whether that's like keeping channels dredged so that you can have port traffic in and out, whether it's like changes in water quality because of the city around the river. And so I just thought that Atlantic sturgeon are a great urban wildlife topic up and down the East Coast, and something that I get kind of pissed off about because I'm kind of like, but if I'd been born like 150 years ago, I could have these like massive fish jumping every time I took the ferry over to Camden or something like that.
I feel like what was not being stated is, I just want to speak to the mystique of this creature. I think as Philadelphians who are into nature, the Atlantic sturgeon is kind of like our legitimate cryptozoology, in that like it's now extinct, and it was probably the largest creature that is extant that inhabited Philadelphia and would be in our rivers, if I'm not mistaken, right? I mean, I think
you got me scratching my head, man. I don't think bison made it out this far, and I think we had elk maybe. So that's the closest.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably rivals elk in weight, right?
Yeah, you're right.
I mean, hundreds of pounds.
Well, tell us, Shannon, how big do these suckers get?
I mean, they quote 1 ton is kind of like what they could get to. I'm not sure of too many 1-ton sturgeon that are still swimming around them. Certainly there might be, but we were just talking about how cryptic these guys are. Atlantic sturgeon are extremely difficult to catch. We have the best biologists on the river putting in all the time and effort they can, and we still struggle to catch them sometimes. So, we're catching routinely fish that are in the hundreds of pounds, and that's common, but who knows what's really out there, to be honest with you.
And just so we know, if people haven't seen one before, what does an Atlantic sturgeon look like?
Oh, wow. So it's a big fish, obviously. So, when you think about a fish, I think a lot of people think about, a bass or a bluegill. It's kind of, the size of your hand, and it's got scales on it and, a big dorsal fin, maybe with some spines. And that's kind of the blueprint of a fish if you were to draw one. Sturgeon kind of knock that out to the wayside. So an Atlantic sturgeon's pretty long. It's not very tall of a fish. So most of its length or its size is in its length. It does not have scales. Instead, it has these little bony plates that kind of run down the side of it called scutes. It kind of is bone, and when they're really little guys, those scutes are actually quite sharp, to keep other things from eating it. But as the fish kind of grows up and, that scute kind of gets worn down, they kind of just become little nubs that are on the side of the fish. Otherwise, they're a brown fish. There's nothing like remarkable in the color, but they have also kind of a bottom mouth. So they have kind of a little snout that sticks out, and then at the underside of that snout is a little vacuumy mouth that kind of goes across the entire stream bed, sucking up little pieces of food. And
so they and once they're adults, they're out in the ocean for the most part.
Yeah, so there's a lot of variation in kind of the timing as to when sturgeon do like kind of these life check marks. So sturgeon, they are really broadly distributed from Canada all the way down to kind of southern Georgia. And depending on where you are in that range, it kind of dictates some of these life history events where a juvenile Atlantic sturgeon might stay in a freshwater river for 1 to 5 years on average, maybe a little bit longer, before it goes out into the ocean. Once it's in the ocean, it might spend 5 to 15, 30 years kind of just swimming around the ocean. And then when it's ready to spawn again, it will come back to that freshwater river where it was born. And sometimes, even when it's outside of spawning season, they will also swim into freshwater rivers, sometimes not even their own freshwater rivers. So they do stray quite a bit. But generally speaking, those subadults and adults are spending most of their life kind of on the continental shelf of the ocean. We think. We don't really know how far off they go, but we think it's mostly kind of sticking closer to the shoreline.
And I guess talk a little bit about their population levels and sort of take us through like what happened to them. How did we have, I'll let you say how many, and then how did we end up with as few as we have now?
Yeah, it's a sad story. So there's history. Like if you go back and find some texts from, early settlers in Jamestown, there's quotes about those settlers seeing, backs of sturgeon and just unfathomable numbers of fish. And, there used to be a few dozen spawning rivers throughout the entire East Coast that were probably fairly similar in population size. So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Atlantic sturgeon that would be in each of those rivers. And then what happened was, for the most part, in the mid 1800s, the caviar industry took off. And so, this was a mostly kind of in Russia where caviar was really popular. And as the Russian species of sturgeon start to get depleted, kind of eyes turn towards America and, what species might exist in America where we could harvest caviar. And Atlantic sturgeon were a target.
Something really quick, because I find people don't understand this. You have to kill sturgeon to get the caviar.
That's right. So caviar is
Right.
female eggs, right? And so, well, you technically could, just kind of take the eggs out of the female and not kill the female adult. But the best caviar, the stuff that people are willing to spend the most bucks for, has to be kind of unspent or not yet kind of extruded. So you have to kill the female in order to get the caviar out. And an Atlantic sturgeon, you don't have a great way to tell a male from a female. Like now we've gotten a little bit better from using some characteristics. But in the 1800s, going real fast, they don't know if it's a female, so they're killing the males too and just kind of throwing them to the side. And at the time too, the flesh of Atlantic sturgeon wasn't very popular. I've never tasted Atlantic sturgeon. I have no idea what it tastes like. But there's some textbooks that say it definitely wasn't a desirable protein by any means. So you're wasting basically the entire fish just to get the eggs out. The real problem is that it takes a sturgeon 5, 15, 30 years in order to actually reach maturity again. So if you take out all of your adults just a couple years in a row, there basically are no adults left, right? So it's not like a trout or some of these other kind of faster living species where they'll kind of replenish their populations pretty quickly. All of the adults were kind of taken out in the mid 1800s, late 1800s. And then that was it. There wasn't much of a bounce back. And we're still kind of trying to bounce back because we're only 1-2 generations after kind of that massive overharvest event. And it just takes a while for those populations to hopefully rebound. But, you asked about population sizes, and that's kind of where this started. They used to be, depending on the river, the population size estimates used to be in the hundreds of thousands. Now, some of the best rivers that we have some sort of estimate for, we're thinking is in the mid hundreds, maybe 300-500. The Delaware River is closer to about 125, 150 adults that are coming back in each year. Yeah. So we're the number that we kind of throw out as like the biggest shock factor is that the population size of Atlantic sturgeon in the Delaware is less than 1% of the historic highs based on our estimates.
And you did the estimates. I thought it was a neat way to study it. Do you want to talk a little bit about the sort of way how you figure out? Because I was talking to a guy who worked for the Delaware in Delaware fisheries, and he was pointing out that like in a big river, in an urban working river where you've got big ships coming up and down, you can't like string a net all the way across the river and literally count the fish. So you have to use other methods to sort of extrapolate to get at it. So how do you do it?
And real quick, isn't the Delaware one of the largest undammed rivers in the country? Like, it's a big deal that there's that few sturgeon in this river because it's a huge undammed massive river, right?
Yeah, that is accurate. What's a little bit harder with sturgeon is that, yeah, there's a lot of river miles, but they require like very specific habitats. So spawning habitat, it has to be like a hard substrate. So it has to be like a gravel or a bedrock or, boulders for sturgeon to spawn. So you could have a ton of that habitat or a ton of those river miles. But if it's silt or if it's mud, that's not really going to help sturgeon too much.
Yeah, the tidal Delaware is a muddy river. So, yes, I'm trying to think where you have the gravel. It's got to be sort of really close to the fall line.
I mean, this kind of gets back to it. It's in the Delaware River. There's best guesses on where spawning is happening, but by all indications, they're correct. Those guesses are probably correct, and it's just outside of Philly. But it's not like 100% confirmed, right? Like we have a lot of evidence to suggest, but it's not 100% there yet.
It's not like you're talking about some narrow, clear, shallow creek in Alaska where you can see the salmon.
It looks exact. It's just a deep brown water, and it's like, oh, they're here somewhere,
right? Because they're not going to get past Trenton, right? Because that's right. They're not going to get, even though there's no dams, they're not going to get above the falls, right? So they're not going past Trenton, which is probably only not even 100 miles from the estuary, right?
Yeah. I have a map of like where we detect them. Let me see if I can give you an estimate.
And so for people who don't know the area, Trenton is a city in central New Jersey that's about an hour north of Philadelphia and sits at where there's the transition from like the coastal plain to the rockier, hillier part of the country, the Piedmont. And so I throw this term. I love one of my favorite terms, given where we live, but the fall line is often the way you refer to that transition from the rocky area to the coastal plain.
And go ahead. Oh no, I'm just saying for people who don't understand the region, when we say an hour north of Philadelphia, it's not like there's wilderness in between. Like what's in between Philadelphia and Trenton is most others would be the density of most other cities. Like it's suburbs, but we call it suburbs. But it's like between Philly and I mean, there's some parks, some natural areas, but between Philly and Trenton, it's basically just it's the same metropolitan area. It's just an extremely densely populated area. So that's why we're talking about this in the context of urban wildlife. I mean, this is a very urban area.
So we monitor sturgeon movements just kind of south of Trenton. So Burlington, New Jersey is where we have our last, at least where I have data for the last kind of detections when we're monitoring sturgeon movement around Delaware River.
Okay. And I guess you mentioned one thing that one factor for why we, it's been 2023. It's been more than 130 years since the crash during the sturgeon boom or the caviar boom on the Delaware. And you pointed out one thing, which is just frankly that with a long-lived creature, it can basically take a female's entire lifespan to produce enough offspring to have enough survive to adulthood to replace herself. So you only got a couple generations, or maybe even 3 or 4 generations. It's still not a lot of generations. But also, what are other factors that hurt sturgeon or keep them from bouncing back? Do you think?
Yeah. So the long time before a sturgeon reaches maturity, and kind of the long lifespan are kind of the two life history aspects that are certainly not helping things. The need for very specific spawning habitats, that hard bottom substrate is becoming increasingly harder to find. And also it has to be in fresh water. So as sea level rises, that saltwater line is going to get further and further into our freshwater habitats and continue kind of moving and marching what is viable spawning habitat further and further up the river. And we don't know how much of this is going on, but if you think about it, a lot is changing in these river systems in 10, 20, 30 years. And the time span between a juvenile sturgeon leaving the river and then coming back to spawn, that habitat is totally different, right? So it could be that the salt line moved. It could be that the substrate has changed. It could be that there's a whole new shipping traffic or channel that's there now that they weren't used to. So how much memory a sturgeon has and how much it's looking for an area versus it knows to go further up, I don't think we really have a great feel for that. But the fact that there's so much rapid change for a very slow moving species can't be great by any means, right? And at this point too, especially in the Delaware, one thing that's hurting it is just getting hit by boats. We're getting a lot of fish that are getting struck by some of these big boats. And we're talking about largely those spawning adults that are going in to make the next generation. And before they can get there, they're getting chopped in half, basically. So that's not every river that's a huge, huge concern, but it's definitely one in the Delaware that's definitely kind of at the top of the list right now.
I would imagine the Hudson and some of the other big, I'm trying to think what other big rivers I'd be thinking of on the East Coast, but
Connecticut?
In that case. Connecticut River, yeah.
The Connecticut population is thought to be extinct at this point. It's got some Atlantic sturgeon in it, but we're not sure where they came from.
So there's some of those stray sturgeon that you were talking about before that sometimes they wander around a little bit.
It's possibly some stray sturgeon. It's possibly some issues with illegal stocking.
What?
All right, we got to drop this bomb.
So it's actually really easy for people to get your hands on sturgeon. Not necessarily Atlantic sturgeon. We wrote another paper on this recently about kind of captive culture for sturgeons across the entire globe is probably going to become an issue. So if you were to go to eBay right now, you can get endangered species of sturgeon shipped directly to you right now.
But what's the source?
It's nuts.
Hatchery fish?
Yeah. How they got into hatcheries can be a pretty mixed bag. It's again, there's no one smoking gun. It can be old hatcheries that have been grandfathered in. It can be people that caught one and came home with it and now it's their pet sturgeon. It's everything, right? And there's no great policies it's illegal to stock sturgeon. Let me start.
I was going to say it's illegal to usually possess an endangered species.
There's a lot of gray area there.
All right.
Depending on how you got it and everything else, it's a whole gray area.
Jeez, man. I was going to say, I come from the world of reptiles and amphibians, and it is very well understood that if you there's just no legal way to have a bog turtle in your house, or in your car, literally in a lot of cases, even in your hands, even just for a second. And so the idea that you can have an endangered fish in your
wait, what if you live in a wet? What if your house happens to be a sedge meadow, wet sedge meadow? Could you have a bug? I
mean, you take a picture of it and you walk away. You're supposed to. And I think honestly, if you pick it up for a sec to see what it is and take a picture, you're probably not going to get in trouble. But the idea is that like when something is endangered like that, you don't, from an enforcement angle, you don't know if that person holding it in their hand intends to put it back down, and so like you basically have to treat all those situations like it's like someone's possibly smuggling it. I am someone who has picked up a bog turtle. I honestly thought it was a spotted turtle. Picked it up, was like, oh shit!
Oh
no! But then I took pictures of it and sent it right away to Fish and Boat, which is what handles reptiles and amphibians in Pennsylvania, and people I know. So we documented it, and I already had permits for other stuff with Fish and Boat, so I think they knew me. But like, it was the kind of thing where I was like, I picked it up, and then there's like two completing circuits in my brain, which were like, hey, oh my God, it's a bog turtle. I have to show everybody. And then like, put it down. Like like a hot potato, like put it down. So I took like a couple pictures and I put it down, and I've not seen that turtle again. But in any case, we're talking about how that there's the chance that you could, which I could imagine can screw up all kinds of things. I mean, I think your paper got into questions of disease transmission, possibilities. You've got just swamping of genetics, and I think there's an element of that like I don't know. Tell me. Sorry, I'm starting to recite your findings to you. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was gonna say, one thing, because Atlantic sturgeon do go back to their natal rivers in order to spawn. What you get is basically every river has its own distinct genetic population. And so sometimes there's actually two genetically distinct populations within one river, one spring spawning run and one fall spawning run. And so from a scientific perspective, it's actually really helpful because we can take a little bit of the fin off of that fish, do what I call like laboratory voodoo, and get what I kind of call like, the DNA fingerprint for that fish. So it's a microsatellite genetic loci panel, but it basically just tells us, we can run some statistics, and it tells us if I had a fish and I gave you its fin clip, I can tell you with a good amount of certainty which population it came from. And that's how we know that this population in Connecticut probably isn't from Connecticut originally, because genetically it has seemed to look much more like a population from somewhere in the South Atlantic. I think it's Georgia is, I think, one of the rivers that it kind of keeps going back to as being the most likely source of those fish.
So some guy in Savannah is.
We got our eyes on you. Yeah, so it's still kind of being debated at this point as to like where those fish came from, and then what's the future, right? Because if they are going to actually reestablish a spawning population, it's interesting. It'd be nice to recover an Atlantic sturgeon population, but it does complicate things, because one thing we use that genetic fingerprinting for, more or less, it is to kind of figure out which rivers or which regions are being impacted by certain management decisions more. So just made up example, if we were doing some sort of, wind development or anything offshore, and you wanted to know what sturgeon are out here, because right, when they get in the ocean, they all mix up. There's fish from all over the coast in these areas in the ocean. You can take a bunch of fin clips, we can do that genetic voodoo, and I can tell you, okay, well, it's these 100 fish are this proportion from this river, and so forth. But now we have potentially an issue where I can't tell Connecticut apart from other populations in the South. So is it the South that's being impacted, or is it this Connecticut River population that's being impacted? It's very hard for us to tell at this point, especially with only genetic data. We also do a lot of movement studies, and we have a lot of collaborative networks across the entire coast that look at movement. And that gives you a little bit more sense for that, but it definitely takes one tool out of the toolbox, so to speak, for us to be able to manage the species effectively.
Huh. And I cut you off before we strayed when I was asking you really quick, call it the cocktail party version of the explanation for how you did it. Like, how did you figure out how many or how few sturgeon we now have in the river like the Delaware?
Yeah, so like we were talking about, these adult Atlantic sturgeon, very hard to capture, right? So they're in their spawning rivers for sometimes days, sometimes weeks, but often sometimes just days at a time. We can't spread nets across the entire river. Even if we could, the chances of actually catching a sturgeon and not killing it, right? Our sampling methods can also be lethal. But so our chances of successfully capturing a sturgeon and releasing it and doing that well enough to get a population estimate is not the greatest for the adults. And then once they're in the ocean, they're basically impossible at that point, right? So we started to kind of think, well, if we can't capture the adults, what could we do with juveniles? So it works out that juveniles are sometimes easier to capture because they kind of congregate in certain areas at certain times of year. They're a little bit more prone to getting caught in some of our gears. And sometimes also there's interest in kind of moving juveniles from areas that might have some sort of big disturbance event. So sometimes in some rivers, we're able to get our hands on juveniles. And so we were thinking, okay, well, we have all these juveniles and we can get our genetic data on it. Can we basically build a family tree? So exactly like you might, build your own family tree where you can run some genetics and figure out who's a sibling and how many parents are being shared among those siblings, and do kind of some back calculations to get at the number of adults. So you might have 100 juveniles, but if they're all siblings, then feasibly they could only be 2 adults, right? Yeah, exactly. So it's a little bit more complicated, but that's what it came down to. We built a bunch of family trees for sturgeon to figure out how many adults likely produced all of those juveniles. And that's where we get to that number of it looks to be around 125 to 150.
Good Lord. Every time you say it, my heart falls.
Cringe.
Yeah. So this is now maybe getting beyond what you specifically researched, but you're smart. You know a lot of stuff. When we look at sturgeon in the Delaware, we're talking about the things that are problems for them. And I'll list a few. I mean, we talked about boat strikes. And then I've heard that channelization could have an impact because it brings saltier water deeper or further into the river, and also just changes the substrate. And these strike me as factors that you'd see in pretty much any port along a river anywhere, whether that's in the mid-Atlantic of North America or Europe or the Pacific. And I'm wondering, are these common problems for anadromous sturgeon populations around the world, or is it like the mid-Atlantic different? I don't know.
It is and it isn't. The shipping problem, it's not isolated to the East Coast, I would say, but it does seem to be a little bit stronger of a pressure compared to some of the other Eurasian species, for example, where damming is one of the big problems there, where they can't actually access any of that river habitat anymore. So, and then some of the other species are more lake dependent than Atlantic sturgeon, versus Atlantic sturgeon just basically only do rivers for the most part. So yeah, it's not a isolated problem to this species, and I mean there's also short-nosed sturgeon in a lot of these rivers too. So just right there adds another species, at least in the Hudson and a couple of the other rivers too.
No, there's a news story. It actually made the paper in Philadelphia a few years ago when a guy caught a short-nosed sturgeon in Philadelphia not intentionally, sort of pulled it in when he was fishing for I think stripers or something near the art museum just on the Schuylkill River in Philadelphia. And it was taken as a positive thing that like the water quality is improved in the Schuylkill enough that we can have short-nosed sturgeon again.
Sturgeon, fish in general, they go some crazy places. And it's now that we're able to track it a little bit better, our technology for tracking fish movement is mind blowing at this point. We're getting a lot of new insights, I think, like almost every day as to very individual variation in movement and where these fish will go if you just leave the doors open, essentially. And it makes it increasingly important that we protect kind of a diversity of habitats that we may have thought weren't so important to begin with. And now that we're getting some better technologies, we're seeing like, oh, actually, story's hard. It's much more complicated.
I got to ask you now, blow our minds. How do you track where a sturgeon goes?
There's a lot of methods. So one, let me give you all the rundown now. So from a genetic standpoint, if you catch a fish and when we genotype it, then we can tell you that, where that fish likely was born. So if you caught a fish outside Delaware Bay, there's a good chance it actually didn't come from Delaware. There's a good chance it's from somewhere else, just because Delaware Bay is a really important sturgeon habitat for populations throughout the entire coast. So that can give you some hint, but that's just kind of a straight line, right? That's not going to tell you what they did in between. So there's all kinds of tagging technologies now. So there's passive integrated transponder tags, which actually go kind of, it's basically the technology that you would put into a dog. It's a little tiny tag. It lasts forever. A lot of adult sturgeon or even juvenile sturgeon are getting tagged by those pit tags. And oftentimes, when a researcher catches a sturgeon, they wand for that tag and write the tag number down, and then we can kind of trace back who's caught that fish. So that gives you a couple more dots to fill in. But then kind of what a lot of people are doing now is acoustic telemetry. So that's a tag that is a little bit bigger. And the battery life on that tag can be anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So that tag is kind of constantly emitting a signal. And if you have a receiver that's nearby, it'll detect that fish for you. And so, throughout the years and with a lot of collaborations, but again, sturgeon biologists at large have a ton of acoustic receivers throughout the entire East Coast at this point. And we're starting to kind of compile some of that data to add in even more dots that you can use to connect kind of the track record of where a sturgeon went. But one limitation of an acoustic receiver or an acoustic tag is that fish needs to travel close to the receiver in order to be detected. So we can put out a ton of receivers and it generates a ton of data, millions and millions of detections. I kind of talked about this a little bit. We don't know how far those sturgeon are going into basically the middle of the ocean, because who's going to stick out a receiver, 100 miles offshore. So there's now satellite tags. So that's a tag. It doesn't last very long, but it constantly kind of pings to satellites to let you know where that sturgeon is going, basically at all times, and that's independent of receivers or anything else. The other one that it just came to my mind is, again, the spawning habitat for Atlantic sturgeon is super isolated, and anything that you do to that habitat, not the greatest, right? And one thing that we don't have a great understanding on as to how it could be impacting sturgeon, but again, it sounds like a really bad idea, is anchorage areas where these big ship anchors are kind of getting thrown into the river and then dragged across the river bottom. They can't be terribly good for sturgeon and their spawning habitat.
I never even thought about that.
Yeah, some colleagues at University of Delaware, Delaware State, New York, they're studying it right now in the Hudson River, and I think looking to extend it into the Delaware. Um, yeah, and so we're using some technologies right now to kind of map what the river bottom looks like. And when you're kind of driving the boat around and looking at some of this imagery that's coming up, it's startling how many, like it looks like rope is just running around the bottom of the riverbed where these anchors have just been dragged through, sometimes for like several hundreds of meters or even longer, probably. It's a lot.
Can't be good for mussel populations either, man.
It can't be good for anything that needs to be on the bottom. Let's just stop there.
Fair to say.
Bill, you know what I'm thinking? Do you know how you invite me? I've done that, I think, twice. I'm happy to do it again. But you know how you invite me to come snorkeling with you for map turtles in Delaware? I bet you that's the area, or close to it, is where the sturgeons are breeding.
I hear you. I think we're on the other side of the fall line, though. Like I've now I'm curious to like go a few hundred yards downstream. I have snorkeled basically right at the fall line, like in Trenton, where there's sort of like a spot where I don't know, I think that's where the rocks stop basically. I just remember some big boulders and freaking huge flathead catfish under them. Yeah, I have plausibly been in water that sturgeon flowing downstream. Sturgeon would have been in like a few minutes later, I guess. And Shannon made a face at flathead catfish.
Well, I mean, it brings up a whole nother.
I call them shad vacuums.
Yeah, well, yeah. So especially some of these non-native catfish species, but any kind of piscivorous fish at this point.
Snakeheads, yeah.
I have a hard time imagining they're not eating sturgeon eggs, right? Oh. I mean, if they eat eggs of everything else, and the little juveniles, right? If they're eating, and a lot of times they're co-occurring in the same rivers as Atlantic sturgeon. I don't know for sure that it's been documented. Like, I'm not sure that there's been like a stomach content that had a clear sturgeon in it. I'm sure there has, to be honest with you.
Well, now you got me curious, Shannon. I have a fantasy. I don't even eat animals. I'm vegetarian, but I would eat a flathead catfish, except for the fact that they're essentially too toxic to eat more than. If you look at the recommendations, you're only supposed to have one meal of flathead catfish from the Delaware River once per month. Like, that's as much as you can eat without, they think, getting healthy. Too much PCBs in your system from eating those suckers. But maybe I'll just go in there and just like, this is again fantasy. If we have a friend, Tony, I have a friend who has spearfishing experience. And I was like, I call him up with a crazy idea. What if we, can we spearfish flathead catfish under rocks in the Delaware? And he was basically like, it's totally doable. But we're sort of, it's still in fantasy realm for people who have already too many hobbies. But now I'm like, well, what if I was like killing them and cutting them open, and we'll just do put everything on iNaturalist, what we find in the stomachs of flathead catfish.
It would be very interesting. I know in Virginia they're really concerned right now with blue catfish because there's two rivers of populations, at least two rivers of populations of Atlantic sturgeon in Virginia. Those guys are even nastier, I think, than flatheads.
Well, because they swim around a lot more? Like, why do you think?
They just seem to eat more.
Okay.
I mean, hard to imagine, but they get bigger. They're. Ugh.
And when you say get bigger, let's frame this. So a big blue catfish is like, it weighs as much as a person. I mean, these
Oh,
are
easily. Absolutely. Yeah.
if you're thinking of like the channel catfish that you caught on some stinky bait, and it was, I don't know, a few pounds and you fried it up for dinner. Blue cats can get I don't know, 40, 50, 60 plus pounds. And the really big ones that they drag out of big rivers in the Midwest are sometimes, again, person size. They're huge.
And they're expanding populations too. So, they're growing in individual numbers, but also like they're exploring these new ecological niches where they're just able to basically like gobble up everything they want. So they're growing. So a lot of individuals, but every individual is also growing pretty fast.
Jeez. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because so flathead catfish are on the radar of Billy and I because they're an invasive species in Philadelphia, and Philadelphia has two rivers. I know you know this, Shannon, but remember, people don't know Philadelphia in this area. But there's two rivers. The major river is Delaware. The smaller river, the tributary is Schuylkill. Although if we were out west, it'd be major river. But we're out east. We're practically in a rainforest, and so we have lots of water out here, which cracks me up when people out west, like my friends who moved out west, will post like when we have a blizzard, they'll be like, "Ha ha!" They'll send me a screenshot of their like weather app about their nice weather, and I'm like, "That's cool." I got paid to be off from work today, and I can walk to tons of restaurants and hang out with my friends, and we have tons of water. So why are you teasing me about? But anyway, so we have two rivers. The big river is Delaware. The smaller river, which would be a major river out west, is the Schuylkill. There is a falls. I think is artificial falls, and there's a fish ladder. But apparently, these flathead catfish, which are the ones that one of the catfish that people noodle, they stick in the Oklahoma. They stick their hands in their mouth. Anyway, they post up at this fish ladder and just hammer the shad that are migrating up the Schuylkill. So this is a big deal for us in Philly.
Yeah, and like there's so many of them, they're having to close the ladders down early. So they're not even getting like as many shad through anymore because they're concerned about them letting all these other snakehead is also going to be a problem for the same reason. Maybe not the same numbers, but it's the same thing. It's trying to get through the ladders.
And so when people think of what a fish ladder is, I didn't quite understand what they were before. But what they are is, let's say you've got a big wide river, Schuylkill River, hundreds of yards across, and you've got a dam running the length of the river, actually at an angle. But in any case, shad, which unlike the salmon you might think about west, they don't jump. They have to sort of have continuous water to get up a river. They have all these mechanisms like water directed across the river and stuff to try to lure them into what is essentially a series of closets that are kind of offset from each other and sort of go up a little bit more each one until you get to above the dam. But that means that your entire like migration of shad is concentrated into like only a few yards width of river. And that means that rather than having them spread out across the river and having a whole lot of targets for, let's say, catfish, you just need a few catfish, and they can essentially every single shad coming upriver has to go past those catfish.
Exotic, invasive.
I don't know if we've ever talked about this in our podcast before. So I live, Billy lives in West Philly. I live in Roxborough. And weirdly, there's this little neighborhood in Philadelphia called Manayunk that has like a strip called Main Street with a whole bunch of cool shops and stores. But it's funny because my neighborhood, Roxborough, completely surrounds it, and it's just like this little strip along the Schuylkill River called Manayunk. And what I think it was is Manayunk was before Philadelphia. Philadelphia is contiguous with the county of Philadelphia. And at one point, there was the city of Philadelphia and the county of Philadelphia. Now we're one and the same since the 1800s. And Manayunk was his own little tiny city or settlement that's been absorbed by Philadelphia. I'm bringing this up because Manayunk is this little strip along the Schuylkill River, and they fought a war with a town just outside the city limits of Philadelphia called Conshohocken, over shad because
Really?
Maniac put a net across the Schuylkill to catch the shad, and Conshohocken didn't get the shad. So people from Conshohocken literally came down to Maniac, and people died over shad. That's how big a deal this is. These migratory fish, androgynous, but not androgynous. What's the word? I always confuse androgynous.
Anadromous.
How do you say it?
Anadromous.
Anadromous. I always want to say androgynous. Probably because I watched too many John Hughes movies growing up. But androgynous fish, people fought a war over it. Literally, people died over shad. Also, by the way, just north of Philadelphia is Valley Forge with this. It's funny because it's like there wasn't even a battle. It's just this.
It was a winter camp.
Yeah, it was like basically George Washington's troops survived the winter just outside of Philadelphia by eating dried shad.
Oh yeah,
That's how important this migratory fish is culturally. With our wildlife podcast, we're circling back here. We have one of the worst healthcare systems of the entire industrialized world because George Washington was successful at beating the British because of shad.
So you're blaming shad for my deductibles?
Yeah, I was making this joke every 4th of July. I'm like, oh, 4th of July. It's like, the day the United States decided to like pay for our own healthcare out of pocket. Seriously, like, oh, what do we get for kicking England out of here? Capitalism and paying for our own healthcare? Do we really live better than English people? I don't think so.
In an indirect way, you're 100% right. Yeah.
But that's the whole point. This is our wildlife podcast. This is the intersection of wildlife and people, and like migratory fish, sturgeon, shad. It's crazy, but this.
As we were talking about earlier, it's like a lot of the migratory fish we just don't even think about anymore because we don't see them, right? And fish are hard anyway, right? They're under the water. Unless you go fishing, in which case you probably only catch a few anyway. You just don't get to interact with them.
I'll speak highly for snorkeling. I think everybody thinks of it as something you do in the tropics, but like I have a lot of fun. I used to say when I was a kid, I'd go bass fishing, and I felt lucky if I caught a couple. And then like these days, I'll stick my head in. I'll swim around looking for map turtles in the Delaware, and I see smallmouth all over the place.
Oh yeah, they like love to like come cuddle you. Is my experience snorkeling with them. Like they get crazy close.
I see those. I see channel cats. I see. I think I saw quillback. Is that one of them? Like it's like a weird
the sucker,
very large sucker.
Yeah, it's a large.
At least to me, it seemed like it was large. And so you see all these. Not to mention, like I like all these little. I feel like it's insulting to a fish biologist to talk like this, but all these like little fish that I want to call minnows, although I know they have their each distinct identities.
Minnows a family.
Shiners and
all of those are minnow, or all of those are the minnow family. You're fine.
I love fish. It's just that like I'm not Aquaman, so I don't see them regularly, and I'm not.
Well, that's why fish conservation is hard, right? You want to share or save the charismatic, petable, cute things, and then it's like there's some fish over here too. I promise they're here.
100%. And also, as someone who's like, it drives me nuts. I'm sure you're going to feel me on this. I know you are. As someone who's into nature, I've talked about this incessantly, but people are always like, "Oh, you love nature. Why don't you move to Colorado?" And I'm like, because the lack of biodiversity would drive me nuts. Because I live out east, where there's in the center of biodiversity of the country. I know it's technically the southeast, but still, we're pretty close. Freshwater fish, the southeast, the southern Appalachians, is unbelievably biodiverse. I know, like French Creek, just outside of Philadelphia, has like an incredible diversity of freshwater fish. A lot of them are really small, but they're awesome. I always joke that I'm a birder because I'm lazy, because birds are easy to see, but like. I tell people over and over again that like I love snorkeling every bit as much as birding. It's just harder to do. But like if you love wildlife and the diversity of wildlife, the East and we're in the Mid-Atlantic, but the Southeast is unbelievable. There's so many endemic fishes in these different drainages in the southern Appalachians, in the Piedmont, in like Georgia, and like Alabama. It's unbelievable.
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, that is like one of the highest diversity hotspots for fish and amphibians in the Southeast.
So
Yeah.
what do you, I'm going to wrap it up. I'll ask you, what are you working on next? Are you allowed to say?
Yeah, probably. A lot of the stuff that we're doing right now is looking at some of these differences in individual movement, trying to see if the habitats that we're protecting in some of these rivers are the right ones, and if it's the fish that we thought that were going there are going there. So, like I said, we have some assumptions about sturgeon ecology, namely, that if you catch an adult in a river, it's going to be natal to that river. So we're starting to test some of these long hold beliefs about sturgeon ecology and finding some pretty surprising results. So yeah, a lot of what we're doing is movement based right now. We're always doing genetic analyses, really trying to get at this idea of how do we estimate population sizes? Because at the end of the day, you need a population size to know who's there, but also if your recovery is working, right? So I can tell you today what that population looks like, but what is that compared to 20 years ago and 20 years from now, right? And then a big project that we're just starting right now is looking at how sturgeon populations are responding to offshore dredging. So there's a lot of, like beach renourishment projects where they pump that sand off from miles offshore to put it back onto the beach. Or I mean, sand is used for a lot of stuff. We think of sand as just like a nuisance when you go to the beach. Sand is a really, really popular thing for a lot of industry. So we're looking
at
you
make concrete,
Yeah. So these sand areas we think hold sturgeon a lot in winter. So how are the sturgeon going to respond if you hoover up their habitat more or less?
I hate going to the beach. I only go to the beach in the winter to look at like seabirds and like sea ducks. It's this big bone of contention with my wife who loves sitting on the beach. So now I can be like, I don't want to go to the beach and sit on the beach because this sand has been stolen from sturgeon. So now I have
it's blood sand.
All right. Well, thank you, Shannon. I'm gonna let you go. It's getting late for two middle-aged dads like us who have to wake up early in the morning. Hopefully, we leave some people with some hope here's my bit of hope. I've in Philadelphia in the past 20 years, we've had a resurgence of Castor canadensis, the beaver, and it is something that I point out to people that Philadelphia, when the Swedes showed up in Philadelphia in the 1640s, they were writing home to sort of say that, we're trading for beaver pelts from further inland because they're already wiped out right around here. And so we went from the 1640s to about 20 years ago without beavers in Philadelphia. It gives me some hope that even when it looks really dire, that comebacks are possible with wildlife.
Yeah, I mean, they're literally, my department literally has to figure out what to do about beavers destroying our, Washington, D.C. gets all the hype about cherry trees, but Philadelphia also has an unbelievable, cherry blossom spectacle, and beavers are literally chewing them down. And we have to figure out how to deal with that.
Tony, next we got to do a beaver episode next, man. It's coming.
Absolutely.
All right, Shannon, have a good night. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. This was awesome.
Thank you so much. It was wonderful.